Good afternoon, or evening, or morning, perhaps, wherever you may be. This is Indie Reads Aloud Radio, episode number 6. I am your host, Diana Catherine Plopa, and today we're going to be listening to a story written by D.M. Taylor. I'm her friend, so I get to call her Danielle. Welcome.
Thank you.
Uh, so, Let me tell you a little bit about Danielle before we get started. She's a full time writer with a constant desire to be at the beach, don't blame you, or close to a combination of water, sand, and sunshine. You can tell by looking at all of the freckles she has collected as evidence. You know what? I've never noticed your freckles until you just now brought it up. Just saying. Okay. If she's not writing in her tiny cottage by the lake, then it's not summer. The rest of the year, she's writing on her couch, under blankets, near a giant bay window. On the less romantic days of writing, and let's be real, most of them are, her pages come together while waiting in a car for one of her kids as part of her chauffeur gig. I'm so glad I've outgrown that part of raising children. Her gravitational pull to science fiction developed through her teacher training, where she concentrated on science education. Well, doesn't that make sense? Graduating from Michigan Tech with an applied science master's degree jump-started her geeky interests. An obsession of time travel pushed through her romantic notions of the world and the easy fear holds of anything frightening. You're going to have to come back and we'll do another episode and talk about frightening, fearful science fiction.
Okay.
That
This
would
is
be
fun.
fun. Um, Accruing in her head is a checklist of places to travel, items to accomplish, and book ideas to write. She regenerates from deep conversation, laughter, and dancing. That's my idea of regeneration. Welcome, Danielle. I'm so glad you're here.
Let's be here.
So you're going to be reading from an anthology tonight,
I am.
um, a little different than the other 5 books that we've heard from so far. So I'd like you to tell me about this journey and how you came to write this particular story.
Absolutely. So, in the summer, I was invited to join a collection of 20 authors who were putting together an anthology for Book Aid International. And I don't normally write fantasy, although I enjoy reading fantasy. So this is my first dabble with fantasy. And they assured me it would be no big deal. I could do it just fine. And I surprised myself that I really did. I wrote it super fast. I wrote it in one sitting.
Wow.
Story. It is a short story though, and the funny part about this is that we each author we used a name generator that kicked out our character, the setting, some fantasy characters that had to be in the story, and then just a little tiny synopsis. And then I had to write the entire story based on that.
That's fantastic. What a great idea. I might steal that structure for an anthology later on in life. What a great idea.
But it was really fun because it allowed me to take some risks that I wouldn't have taken if I didn't have
Sure.
to.
Sure. How cool is that? Okay, what's the title of the story you're going to read for us today?
It is called Sultana of the Deathly Stars.
Okay.
And the main character name that I was given from this name generator is Nessa Sagehammer. I was told there had to be a flying cat and a dragon in this little synopsis, and then I had to go write.
Wow. And how long did they give you to write?
We had since the summer, and then the deadline was just in December for our first draft.
So you had about 5 or 6 months to finish?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's fantastic. I am super excited to hear this story. Will you please read aloud for us?
All right, here we go. On the night her mother brought her into the world, Nessa Sagehammer was abandoned. The icy stillness that welcomed Nessa that blistery winter evening had ushered out her mother. Leave this room, the midwife said, holding the crying baby Nessa. Allow Isa the decency of a private passing. Isa's husband was well aware of his wife's abilities, even in death. Many years later, one stormy night brought the young lady Nessa to her cliff where she often screamed at the sea. It still consumed Nessa with rage-filled grief that Isa had abandoned her, and she knew where to find her mother. She recounted the story she'd been told again and again about the night she was born. Each night, your mother became the sea, and as far as your father was concerned, regardless of her death, this night was to be no different, her midwife would say. Aaron resigned himself to give her back to the sea where she might live on and love him from afar, and he'd always know where to find her. I know this part, Nessa replied. He carried my mother through the blinding snow until he trudged frozen and numb to the shoreline. Exactly, her midwife would tap Nessa's nose with a loving gesture. There he found a small boat and laid Isa within. The water beat against the shore, a relentless demand for its lady Isa to return. Nessa often asked to be told this story, and her favorite part to recite was the ending. And he remained as the icy water refused to freeze over and wait for Lady Isa and did not leave until it claimed her. Nessa pulled herself from her misty meditation as a thunderous boom accompanied the pounding rain. Far past her little cottage, nestled within the forest, Nessa could still make out the silhouette of her father's castle, the constant reminder to Nessa that he didn't want her. He hadn't once seen Nessa since the night she was born, and he lost his Lady Isa as a consequence. As the waves lapped against the headland and further soaked her sweeping emerald dress to her body, Nessa fell to the ground, consumed by her tears. Why? She cried out to a singular star shining through the stormy skies. She waited for the star to respond. That star, her star, had been looking for Nessa, had been looking over Nessa for many years. The girl had started sneaking out around her 10th birthday. The older she became, the more often she'd slip away into the night. Her nighttime adventures eventually led her beyond the forest's edge to this narrow headland jutting the coastline. Here, she'd dangle her legs from the side of the cliff while lying on her back, talking to the same bright star shining overhead. I wonder if anyone will ever want me, she said to her star. Her eyes fixed on its steady location. She swore it beamed a pulse brighter. Did you just answer me? She asked, hunched on her elbows. I must be imagining it. Night after night, Nessa found that star, even when every other constellation moved with the changing seasons. You must love me, as all of the other stars have left this sky. Only you remain. And after a time, she came to expect her star's subtle responses. In many ways, her star became human-like to Nessa. I waited all day to sing your favorite song to you, she told her star one summer evening. For the first time ever, Nessa watched her star dance across the sky. Oh, she exclaimed, I didn't know you could do that. As the years passed, Nessa told him of her loneliness and longing to be part of a family. He'd listen and wish to have her as his own. This star too was alone and banished. He too knew this wish. But that stormy night, as she looked to her star for comfort, while rain pelted her skin, a small creature brushed against her leg. Startled, Nessa whipped her head around to discover almond-shaped eyes glowing in the darkness. Shrieking, she rose from the ground into a run. Bright star, please help, she begged. Rising high over Nessa's head, she watched in dismay as the green hue of those eyes appeared to float. How big is this monster? She wondered in terror. Squinting to get a better look, she couldn't be clear if she was seeing shadows or the large outline of something massive. Nessa retreated into the nearby trees, which granted her coverage from the storm. She hid under branches that she'd weaved together on an earlier, much less perilous escapade. With measured breaths, Nessa was careful not to give away her location, though she continued her maniacal search in the dark for these glowing eyes. Nessa wished she hadn't chosen to come into the storm to swear at the open sea, cursing her dead mother. It was then she heard a woman's voice booming through the dense air. Nessa, come out, the woman commanded. There is no reason to worry. Nessa had been alone most of her life. She hadn't learned to trust anyone outside of the midwife's cottage, and she didn't have any reason to obey that strange voice. I'll come to you, my dear, the voice said. Her lids squeezing shut, Nessa swallowed hard. The tips of her toes met the soft, wet fur first. As the creature brushed along her bare feet, her eyes flew open to behold what had come with the woman. It was the same creature she'd noticed on the cliffside. Look at me. I am nothing to fear, she said. Your mother Isa sent me. The woman's voice more near. She heard your crying. A deep purr rose from the creature accompanying the woman. It brought Nessa a calmness she'd never known. Nessa ached to pet it, but her vision hadn't yet adjusted in the dark forest. At once her pupils settled onto the animal, and Nessa discovered the creature was nothing more than a cat. Its black fur was soaked from the rain. The cat came closer to Nessa, and its emerald eyes fixated on Nessa's face. Your mother says you are ready to receive your gifts, young Nessa, the cat said. The girl stared, absolutely stunned, her mouth hanging open. The cat sat on its hind legs and stretched open a glorious set of wings that glittered under the moonlight. Nessa peered beyond the winged animal past the trees. She contemplated running from the tree stand, but although the rain had slowed, it was still falling onto the rolling hills beyond, so she was compelled to stay in her shelter. Nessa looked back at the winged cat, unsure if she had tricked herself into seeing something altogether wrong. The cat now soared to a nearby tree and perched on a branch. It spoke to Nessa. Are you ready for your gift, dear? Nessa blinked into the vast space now between them. She stared as the cat flapped its wings in unison with a rapid succession that instilled fear into Nessa's chest. She didn't want what this cat was offering. Is this witchcraft? She whispered to herself. Cats didn't talk, and they certainly didn't fly. Still hiding beneath the branches she once spent hours weaving together, Nessa recognized that her long red locks of hair suddenly became lighter and that her arms tingled from tender brushes of love she'd craved her whole life. Soon she was eye level with the black cat, who now studied her with intense approval. Nessa, I am your Muim, the cat said as it flapped its wings. It lifted itself from the tree branch and beckoned Nessa to follow it with her eyes. Nessa was aware that she was everywhere that the cat could fly. I wasn't aware that I had a godmother, Nessa replied. The cat ignored Nessa's comment. Pay attention, girl, Hermine scolded. I have revealed your gifts. It's time you try them. She glanced down at the newness of her body. Nessa found that she had shifted from human form into the branches of the trees surrounding her. Upon each thought of a location in the forest, Nessa became what she pictured in her mind's eye. She looked to the coastline and became the lowest hanging branches that dipped low to the water's edge. As she peered at her reflection in the moonlight of the now dry skyline, Nessa saw that her red hair had become a mix of the most delicate twigs jutting from the tree and dancing leaves. She'd never been so glorious. Nessa wanted to shake her newness Nessa wanted to share her newness with the familiar bright star overhead. She looked up and sang out to him. Can you recognize me? She asked. The cat glided onto one of Nessa's outstretched branches. That star is named Aljabar, the cat said in her silky voice. He's the sultan of the deathly stars. The cat, now on four paws, walked along Nessa's thinnest branch. You shouldn't speak freely to him. Why not? Nessa asked. It is said that whenever he comes too close, his radiance smothers nearby life, turning it to dust. Nessa's branches swayed with a breeze that swept up from the sea's current. That was your mother, the cat warned. She watches over you to be sure you don't get too close. Again, Nessa looked up at her star. Nessa was certain her godmother was wrong. I've been close to him for many years. He's never brought me any harm, Nessa said. The cat resumed its seated position. How very interesting. After a long moment, Nessa's godmother went on. It is said that true love can release him from his prison. How? Nessa asked. He must explode into a supernova that he may fall away within the dust and be reborn from the ashes. Nessa begged her godmother, please help me release him. If there is no true love between you two, the supernova will consume you with its raging fire. The cat's tail swung back and forth like a mad pendulum. The forest will burn, she said. The cat's warning heard, Nessa spotted the tallest tree in the forest, and in that moment, Nessa embodied it. She lifted the longest of her century-old branches, arms outstretched to her sultan star. I am yours, and you are mine, she cried out. The black cat landed on Nessa's head this time, her paws pressing firm into the treetop. Young one, you have until the sun rises with your star. In the morning, you must return to your human shape. If you do not, your branches will burn from the heat your deadly star consumes in its rotation within the sun. Nessa remained through the night in the old tree, having never gotten this close to her star before. She was sure that she'd find a way to release him from his prison. Before dawn, the cat returned, purring into the soft stillness the last minutes of the night offered. Her godmother was gliding between the leaves of Nessa's hair and swooped below to the sturdy trunk upon which it grounded her. The cat scratched its spine along her legs. My dear, the cat purred, the galaxies have regarded the two of you tonight. She patted on her paws. They have granted your wish. My wish? Nessa inquired. You may be with your sultan, but he will not look the way you recognize him. Nessa pulled herself from the treetops and found that she was level with her godmother below the canopy. Her dark, rich bark was softening into the skin she'd been born into, and her heavy red locks once again fell across her cheeks. What will he become? She asked the cat. They've said you'll know him when you see him, the cat answered. And just as the orange glow along the horizon hinted at its grand entrance, a burst of light showered the highest point of the early morning sky where Nessa had last located her star. Until then, Nessa had never seen a shooting star. In the moments following her return to human shape, Nessa kept her gaze on the nova disappearing into darkness. At once, she became overwhelmed with the double loss and once again ran to her cliff, but this time in desperate search of her sultan. She wished her flowing green dress, which now blew in the breeze, was the lush leaves that had carried her up to him. With the fire of sunlight creeping above the water's edge, Nessa first noticed the distant image of wings flapping. Morning beckoned, and her star was no longer. The soaring creature caught her attention as it flew toward her. She wondered, yet shook the foolish idea from her thoughts. Her sultan would not come to her as a bird. Still, she waited as it closed in on her location. Much too late, Nessa realized she had been mistaken. It wasn't a bird at all. It was a reptile, and it too had glorious wings. Stricken with fright, Nessa understood she was standing on the narrow strip of coastland that a dragon had chosen as its landing. She looked around for her godmother, who appeared to have abandoned her. Stumbling backward, Nessa tripped on a rock and fell to the ground. Above her, the dragon circled, fire seeping from its nostrils. Concerned for her beloved forest, Nessa didn't dare run inside so as to not lead the dragon with its fire within its boundaries. Instead, she laid still and looked at the beast above her. The rhythm he created in his flight brought a stillness to Nessa. She'd become transfixed by the dragon's infinite loop. Intoxicated by the calm the dragon induced, Nessa observed his orbit for a long moment until she recognized her bright star within the dragon's eyes. In an instant, she was on her feet, calling out, I am yours and you are mine. Just as the sun finished its rise above the horizon, Nessa had proclaimed her love. The dragon swooped onto the headland, bowing deep before Nessa. An orange fire consumed the beast, leaving behind her sultan. His bronze skin gleamed in the golden sunrise. His dark hair fell to his shoulders, and Nessa couldn't take her eyes off his beautiful face. She could not look away from the dark, concentrated circles of his eyes where she still found the energy of the stars. Nessa brought her hands to her mouth, her joy overwhelming. Al-Jabbar? She asked. He bowed deeper. Lady Nessa? He asked in return. She ran to her star. Al-Jabbar embraced her. She was no longer alone, and he was now free. Every evening after sunset, Nessa goes into the forest, becoming the trees. Her sultan flies off into the night sky, breathing fire. She sways in the wind while he burns the stars that orbit too close. Before dawn, they unite to welcome a bursting new sunrise on the horizon.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. What a great story. I've been a long time lover of dragons, so that's very, very cool. What a great, oh my gosh. I love storytelling. So much fun. So would you remind everybody again, please, the name of the anthology?
It's called Once Upon a Name.
Okay. And it's in pre-order right now.
Right now,
Right in the beginning of February. So when does it come out for real?
April 20th.
Okay, super. So this program should air before the book comes out so everybody can listen to the story and then get super excited about it coming out. Thank
Yeah.
you so very much for joining us today. I appreciate your reading. It was fun to hear another side of your talent. So thank you very much.
I appreciate you inviting me.
Have a wonderful evening.
You too.
Bye bye.